Welcome to the podcast Corner of Special Education. My name is Karsten Skrulle-Gundersen, and I wish you a most warmly welcome to my Corner of Special Education. In this extra episode, you will hear my conversation with Ingrid Tien about MEYA, Modular Evidence-Based Practices for Youth with Autism Spectrum Disorder. MEYA is a comprehensive clinical training and clinical decision-making personal assistant for clinicians working with youth on the autism spectrum in outpatient settings, hosted at University of California, Los Angeles. This conversation was recorded during the summer of 2024 when Ms. Tien was working as a coordinator on the MEYA project. I wanted to learn more about MEYA, how youth with ASD can benefit from it, and more. Now, my conversation with Ingrid Tien. Excellent. And with that, we are again on the beginning of a new episode of the podcast Corner of Special Education. And another episode in the series Let's Talk About. And today's topic is, well, it's a four-letter word. Actually, it's MEYA. Is that correct pronunciation?
Yeah, MEYA is
Yeah.
okay.
And also with that, you have heard the voice of the episode, this episode's guest. So before you give yourself a short introduction, I would just like to welcome you to this Norwegian podcast. And I am based in Oslo, Norway. And with that, you can give yourself a short introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ingrid, and I am the project coordinator of the UCLA MEYA intervention program under Dr. Jeffrey Wood. And I am a graduate student at UCLA in human development and psychology, and my research mainly involves autism and the diagnostic process as well as interventions.
Correct. And I must say that when we first got in touch, it was because on Wednesday we are recording on Monday the 5th of August. And it's around 7 p.m. here in Norway, and it's about 10 a.m. at your place. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, it's 10 a.m.
So I really appreciate that you taking the time to join me. And the reason I contacted you was I noticed the MEYA and the program and your work with the children with autism on a Norwegian website. I think you have maybe a collaboration with the University College again here in Norway. Is that correct?
Yeah, so our lab has a pretty close connection with several researchers in Norway, but mainly I would say Dr. Wood has worked really closely with Dr. Christer Fjørmstad. I don't know if I'm saying that out exactly correctly, at Oslo. And so we have worked on potentially bringing MEYA over to Norway and seeing if we can replicate its effectiveness there, because we do it would be beneficial for the autistic youth in Norway, of course. But MEYA is used across the world, and so Norway just happens to be one of our collaborations, one of our close ties within our lab that we have. We do many different research projects with several different folks in Norway. But mainly Krista is the one that we work with.
Perfect, thank you. And before I ask you about your understanding of autism, well, we can include that in the same question, but why do you find autism interesting?
I think everyone has their own motivations behind this question. Personally, I think for myself, it was early exposure to what autism meant to me. I think many people have a very stereotyped understanding of what autism is, considering a lot of times what media puts out there as well as what our general understanding is. Because the special education system in the United States is very segregated, oftentimes they put kids in separate classrooms, and the fight for resources is typically quite difficult. And so because of that, I think many people's understanding is typically autism as a more significant disorder, and people that's that there's a significant disability there, or they see a very stereotyped view of like a savant on
Yeah, yeah,
television, which is typical media portrayal. I think that I was interested in autism because one of my good friends back in elementary school is autistic. And I personally saw how difficult it was for her to sort of interact with others socially. That was the main difficulty for her. And especially after some, issues and tragedies there were in her own family, those sorts of mental health difficulties of her kind of exacerbated. And so my understanding of autism always stemmed from that. It always stemmed from a female, very close friend of mine, which is very much what drives my own personal research and my understanding of autism, because I think I was not necessarily exposed to as many stereotyped understanding as most people typically are.
correct. Thank you. And I was just wondering because you were talking about the special education in the US, and I was wondering if you could,
Yeah.
is it possible to, uh, it's maybe a difficult question to give a short answer to, but where is the debate concerning autism and special education in the US as of 2024?
As in, like, what is a more hotly debated topic within special education
Yeah.
for autism? I mean, I'd say like I want to say that I'm not a special educator. We have lots of people in our program and lots of people I work with on a regular basis who have worked in the school system. I personally have not, so I think my understanding of this is likely flawed. But I will say that from my perspective, their school districts are largely based on funding. And so the resources allocated to a child with autism looks drastically different. And it tends to be that in higher resource areas, they're able to help kids with a wider range within the spectrum. So they have a range of resources, those sorts of things. Our school system, our special education system also is quite hesitant to give out resources a lot of the times because we have something called like a state put order, meaning that once they give a child an extra resource, so for example, an autistic child, if they give them occupational therapy for 30 minutes a week, then the parents are the ones who choose to terminate that, which means that for a school district to commit to 30 minutes a week of occupational therapy for a child means that they are committing it through potentially the end of high school, because it's the parents who choose to terminate the service. And so because of that, the experiences for autistic children vary very differently. It's dramatic between districts that are better resourced and districts that do not have access to as many resources because of so many funding issues. So I think that's kind of one of the more debated topics right now is how we can continue to support these children within these different contexts, and how also there's an intersectional relationship between youth of color and youth with other forms of disabilities that do or don't get sort of segregated or separated into different sort of categories of resource allocation within the school system.
I see. Now, I was talking earlier this summer, and we are going to talk about MEYA in just a little while, but I was talking to Professor Michael Barbour, and he has been doing a lot of work with the school system up in Canada, and he told me that for each region or part of Canada, there is a different way of teaching. Sort of, if you are if you can teach in one part, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can teach in a different part. Is that is also for the states in the US?
That's an interesting question. Yes, I believe so. I think if you're licensed, if you have your teaching credentials within one state, I don't know if it's 100% transferable to another state. But it's also important to mention that state by state, there are significant differences within the special education system or just support overall.
Yeah.
So, for example, California is one of a handful of states that provide something called, I believe, IHSS, which is like in-home support services, which allows parents to be compensated for the time they're supporting their child at home, which is unique to California and only a handful of other states. And so I think the system changes pretty differently state by state, of what they're willing to. And I think that does change with the teaching credentials and whether they transfer over as well.
Correct. Thank you. Now, let's talk about MEYA, because it's a word of 4 letters, and it's short for well, you can say the full name. What is MEYA?
Yeah, so MEYA or MEYA is short. It's an acronym for a full program called the Modular Evidence-Based Practices for Youth with Autism. And it is a clinical decision-making tool and resource guide, basically, for practitioners of autistic youth. So it is designed to be used if you are someone who sees a child for weekly or regular therapeutic interventions. And so it takes aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy. And the unique part of MEYA is that it modularizes cognitive behavioral therapy and uses a decision-making tool through a specially curated, basically, measure to take a child's like weekly needs and recommend in a modular form what sort of things they should be tackling on a week-by-week basis.
I was wondering because you when we first got in touch, you were able to provide me with a login to MEYA, and
Yes.
I watched a little bit of the the YouTube video that explains what MEYA is, and how can using MEYA help students or children with autism and the team around?
Yeah, so I would say that it sort of indirectly serves these youth through training the team surrounding these children. So specifically, MEYA specifically targets the anxiety and emotion dysregulation component that is often co-occurring for autistic youth. So we have lots of traditional interventions that target these sort of autistic difficulties, but MEYA is unique in that it targets the anxiety and emotion dysregulation that is co-occurring. And that's occurring in the majority of autistic youth, that they have some form of co-occurring anxiety disorder, depression, anxiety, those sorts of things, mood disorders. And so we know that cognitive behavioral therapy, such as through programs like Coping Cat, is traditionally very effective for anxious children and emotionally dysregulated children. So MEYA kind of combines those two aspects by having a modular and adapted cognitive behavioral program that benefits these youth with anxiety and emotion dysregulation. Specifically, the modules that we have, there are 6 main modules of MEYA. And out of these 6 modules, they sort of combine the difficulties within the two. So, for example, a crime difficulty for autistic youth is something like a repetitive behavior or a routine, those sorts of things, falling under the general category of restrictive and repetitive behavior. And so you can imagine that having difficulties with rigidity and having difficulties with routine can often spike a lot of anxiety for these children. So, the classroom is not ready every single day by 8:45, and it can invoke a lot of feelings of anxiety. And so what MEYA does is we have a module that's specifically looking at dysregulated behavior. And so this would be an application of how this sort of material that MEYA is going over directly applies for these children in a classroom context, with not in a classroom context, etc., by combining the unique difficulties of what it is like to both have autism and also be anxious or emotionally dysregulated, often as a result of the difficulties that are experienced by these autistic youth. So that is basically how MEYA works.
Perfect. Now, I was wondering about because in the YouTube video, well, briefly watched a bit of. Um, there were the progress of how to, when you start to using MEYA with a child with autism. What is the first step? Because there were some charts, and yeah, what is progress?
Yeah, so to use Maya, there's basically several steps. First, we have a very long basic training video to show you how to use the site because it is a little bit complicated and it is, of course, still a work in progress. We have it out basically out and free, disseminated to the world because we want to disseminate as many effective resources as possible. However, that it is still a work in progress, so there's often still things being added, both content and technical things being added to the site. But generally speaking, how Maya works is to first complete a series of assessments. That is considered our like core A module. And the assessment uses a measure by Dr. Weiss called the Youth Top Problems Scale. So Youth Top Problems is a completely individualized measure that looks at repeated measures of progress, essentially. So what that means is that Maya allows you to customize the top 10 difficulties that your child is experiencing. And then you categorize those within the different modules that we offer. And so what happens is you take those on a week by week basis. You can always change them and you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. And based on those responses, we recommend you a module to look at. But that is core A. That's a step to utilizing the My website, just so that we have a profile for the child you're thinking of, because we price people into individual clinics and then they make a separate client profile for every one of their kids. And so they do the assessment module and then they go over some more basic information. So that's core B and core C. So core B is mainly just looking at the child skills, core skills that you can go over with the child. And the core C is looking at the core skills you're going over with the parents. Because Maya is meant to be used in conjunction of the whole family. So both the caregivers and themselves. And then from there, after having gone through those materials, which are more basic ideas of those of these general concepts, and you can also get a layout, get into like an understanding of the layout of Maya just in general. And then from there, we recommend the modules for you to work on. And so that way, the pace of your work is very much determined by the progress of the child, which we understand is not always linear, which is why the site is designed the way it is, because we don't want to say, okay, every module you work on for 2 weeks, because despite all of these problems being very prevalent amongst the population we're studying, it isn't always the case for every individual child. And it may be that this issue of having disruptive or dysregulated behavior when there's a disruption to a routine is something that will persist for a whole year or something even longer, in which we would continuously recommend for the materials of the module to be reviewed within a session.
Perfect, thank you. And when what kind of because I read or in the video there are you can see that different kind of tools, like for example cartoons and yeah. So what kind of when you are working with a when a child with autism and you have done the assessments and all that, what kind of tools do you use to to work with the child?
Yes. So, like within a context of one of the modules that we would recommend, so within every one of the modules, there are also different session types. So, for example, like in the dysregulated and disruptive behavior module, we have 4 different session types, and for each of them, it just depends on the needs of the child. So, like if we were taking the example of within dysregulated and disruptive behavior, we have something like positive motivation for self-control. And so we recommend here that you use this session for about 2 to 5 meetings with the child because there's typically that much material to go through. And so we would have a clinician read over this information. And so what we have is a printout of step-by-step instructions for what to do within the sessions themselves, which is like a handout, as well as other printouts of these like cartoons and activities to do with the child. So, like within the session, there's a link to a sample cartoon to talk to with the child. There's step-by-step session instructions. And then within each of that, we have many different examples of pop-ups as well as definitions for words that are being introduced for the first time. And so we recommend that clinicians read through this material. And then we typically also have a video example with that we made, prior to the publishing of the site to kind of show what the session might look like. And then also just a short quiz at the end. And so the materials are meant to be just sort of a review session for the clinicians, but most of them are taken directly into the session using like the cartoons, using the step-by-step instructions for clinicians to continuously reference throughout the session with the child.
Excellent. And I was wondering, how many years has MEYA been a program?
So, I believe the MEYA site was first published sometime in like 2016 or 2017. It was before I joined the program, so the dates are kind of fuzzy. But before MEYA, there were sort of iterations of clinical trials for the actual therapeutic intervention. So the therapeutic intervention itself is called Bianca. We typically always name it after like a child. So we have Bianca, and then before that was Sebastian. And so Bianca and Sebastian were kind of two iterations of understanding this sort of need for an intervention. And then Bianca was the actual clinical trial itself. And so Bianca is the CBT technique, is the evidence-based cognitive behavior techniques for the autistic youth. And so that we basically had graduate students and other clinicians work with the kids themselves. And so we were seeing, okay, if we were to deliver the intervention, is it effective? And so we found that was effective. And then we also have our current iteration of MEYA/Bianca, which is our science study that is running for another year, where we are basically training outside clinicians to be able to do this. Because intervention research is like a very long-term thing. Dr. Wood has been working on this for probably 20 years, from sort of the pilot studies of the needs for MEYA, and now all the way to trying to train outside clinicians using the MEYA website to see whether it's effective. But the MEYA study itself was just looking at the effectiveness of the site. So every study we do is sort of a very slow step towards being able to have this disseminated very popularly.
Excellent, thank you. And I was thinking about, since it's been, you say, 2016, 2017, around there.
Yeah.
What kind of experience with MEYA is there to show for as of this moment?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, from the time where the program was started, what experiences are there that you can talk about?
Yeah, so as in, like, we have had several hundred clinicians use our site, and then the results of the study themselves from when the clinicians use the site in our clinical trial are also published. And so those basically just show clinicians' feasibility with using the site. And basically, it was a multiple baseline study. So it was just seeing, like, measuring the child progress based on using the site. And so that, I would say, that is like the primary experience out of using the site. And you're still analyzing a lot of the qualitative data of how clinicians describe the site when using it. If that's what your question was asking. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you. And before we get to, because as we talked about before the recording started, there are the two last questions are always the two that I'm ending conversation with. We are not there, but I'm just mentioning it. It's the first one is what you want the listener to take home from this conversation, and if you have tip of the day, a website or podcast or anything. But I was thinking about, is there any, what kind of pros and cons are there with MEYA as a program?
Right, that's a great question. So MEYA right now has I'll start with the cons. There's several limitations of the MEYA website, which is that the website is still being redesigned because as I'm sure that you experienced yourself, the navigation of the website is somewhat difficult. We were not exactly sure, at least the team was not exactly sure where the site was going to end up, whether we were just going to use it within the context of the study. I know that it was meant to be published, but we've since received a lot of feedback of where the MEYA website could be. And so we're working, the team has worked with like a user experience team to try to redesign the website to be a little bit more friendly and help people who are actually using the site understand how it's going, how it works. And we also are working to do things like cut down on the basic training video and just have the materials speak more for themselves, and see how the navigation can be more easily done. So that's kind of where that site is going. And sorry, I forgot the other part of your question.
Well, I would just because now you were explaining a bit about the cons of
Yeah,
MEYA.
yes.
And is there, because you have talked about several of the pros, is there anything around that that is worth mentioning?
Yes. So I would say the largest pro is that it is an evidence-based practice by APA 53 division criteria, which is a difficult criteria to meet. And it is also free because lots of these sorts of interventions are behind a paywall, especially a lot of base materials are behind a paywall, which there's nothing wrong with. But I believe that one of the more unique parts of MEYA is that it is completely free and open to use. And we also are very, very open and receptive to collaboration and feedback. I think this is part of the con, but we're also working on expanding MEYA as much as we can. Right now, it is only designed or used with school-aged children, which means 6 to 14. I do not believe it's been replicated with a larger sample, with a larger age range. Just knowing the material myself, I do believe that it would be beneficial for a larger age range, because a lot of times, obviously, anxiety doesn't stop for autistic children when they're old. So I think that an expansion of the age range would be great, as well as a wider representation within our samples to try to replicate it in other countries with different cultures, for example, where some of these issues might present a little bit more differently. But that speaks to just the overall clinical representation of autism.
Perfect, thank you. And I was wondering, because this program is mainly designed for children with autism, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you say that because there are different or children with other kinds of diagnosis within neuro diversity, like ADHD and Tourette's,
Yes.
and yeah, with that also struggles with, for example, social interaction. Would you say that one can use the MEYA program with these children as well?
That's a great question. So I think that the part of neurodevelopmental disabilities is that they're so varied. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend MEYA to resource, like as a resource to like some fraction of that population. For example, if your child is non-speaking or if they're not able to participate in these sorts of therapy interventions, then it likely isn't effective. Um, with ADHD, it's potentially effective, but I'd say that because autism is so uniquely composed of these two different traits, restrictive and repetitive behaviors and the social communicative difficulties, that some of the modules might be applicable for youth with ADHD or just neurodivergent youth in general. But I think generally speaking, because it was developed with entirely an autism sample in mind, entirely based on autistic traits, that it is likely most effective with that. But again, like I said earlier, this is sort of a follow-up to other really great child anxiety resources like Coping Pet that have been very effective, and have been found to be very effective overall, that we would also recommend.
Perfect, thank you. Now, I was thinking about, before we take the two last questions,
Yes.
Could you say a little bit around ambitions for MEYA and give us a glance into the future?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll talk about our current study, Cyan. So Cyan is basically a Maya replication within a community-based setting. So a lot of the times with research, it ends with a randomized controlled trial, an RCT. It ends with, okay, does it work or does it not? So that's looking at effectiveness. And we publish off of those results, and then a lot of times it's behind a paywall, or sometimes it's disseminated freely. However, there's a push for these sorts of interventions to have an efficacy component as well. So that means putting it out into the community and seeing, is this actually feasible? Would people actually use it? How would they use it? And what changes can we make to see if they can actually use it? And so that is considered the last step of the sort of overarch of intervention work. And so that's what we are doing right now. The science study recruits clinicians from California, and we are basically training them in the MEYA technique and seeing how well they're how much progress the children they are working with have. So we're mostly recruiting through the California school system. Majority of our clinicians are coming through the school system. They work with kids in schools in some way or another. Or through, we're funded by the Department of Defense. So we also work with military families. So um, we work with the naval medical systems and also with the regional centers, which is a great resource within California, where we basically connect resources to to for the families with a child with autism. And so that's what the regional centers are. So we work with regional centers as well. So basically trying to have our hands in all these different community-based partnerships. Are these going to work in community settings with a focus on diversity? Just because typically the samples we get from a UCLA-based randomized controlled trial might be quite a skewed sample. There there isn't always the best representation of who is actually living in the state of California or even the county of Los Angeles. And so that's basically what the study is looking at, is whether it is still effective within the community and how can we continue to make it better within the context of trying to make it accessible for everyone.
Perfect, thank you. Now, I think that for me, considering that I didn't know a lot about MEYA before we got in touch, so I'll just say that through our conversation now, and I hope that this also goes for those who listen to this conversation when the episode is published, that they have gotten a little bit more understanding about what the program is, and maybe a little bit more curious and want to further dive in and to get a greater understanding of it. But to sum up and end this conversation, what do you want the listener to take home from this conversation?
That's a great question. I think that if you fall into our target demographic, then you should definitely consider checking out MEYA and using MEYA, but more so about the massive wealth of resources there are for clinicians to receive these sorts of training. They're very much out there, and that I think that a part of the study is that we are trying to bridge this gap between research and actual practice, because the practice of these sorts of interventions is sparse in comparison to how they're developed, which just doesn't bring in the proper continuation of resources to the community that actually needs them. And so, I think that a take-home message is that if you are a special educator, if you are someone who works within these systems, utilize every possible chance that you have to work with researchers and people who are trying to bring these sorts of resources to your classrooms, to the kids you're working with, because your feedback is invaluable. It helps these sorts of things happen in the first place, and there needs to be a better connection between how resources are developed with the communities themselves in mind.
Perfect, thank you. And as always, when an episode is published, I will create a post on the blog that follows the episode, and where I will link up to the website so that it's easy to find. Now, along with the website itself, you have a closing tip of the day.
A closing tip of the day.
Yeah. Some kind of resource that you find valuable and then that you want to share with others.
Like a resource.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to say anything more about mine because I just talked about it for so long.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it can also be a different website or podcast or a movie or a book or article or yeah.
okay. Let me think about this. I think that's the trouble about being a researcher is that we're so much on the research side of things that it's hard to remember, okay, like these are great representations outside of the research world. I think that let me think a tip. I'm not really sure. I think that I think overall the representation of autism on the media has improved in like the time that I've been in my PhD for the last 3 years, for example. I have a close colleague who works with an organization that puts on shows like Love on the Spectrum, which I think has to my tip, my shout out, because I think that plus another documentary called Crib Camp on Netflix is also a great those are great shows to check out because they very much show a deeper understanding of what it is like living with a disability or a neurodevelopmental disability overall, and having people consistently underestimate your abilities and underestimate who you are as a person and your ability to have a personality in the first place. So I would say about those two. I think we talk about those a lot within our circles. So
Perfect. Thank you. And once again, thank you for taking the time to joining the podcast Corner of Special Education. And I wish you all the best with your work ahead. And yeah, and well, yeah, thank you very much.
yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. It was very exciting to talk about MEYA.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
That concludes this extra episode. But before our ways part, remember to follow the podcast on Spotify or where you listen to podcasts. Also, remember to follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Also, if you want the latest news and posts from the blog, you can sign up to the newsletter from spaceblog.no. If you have any comments or want to get in touch, don't hesitate to send me a PM or email at question@spaceblog.no. As always, I really appreciate if you rate, share and recommend the podcast. Finally, thank you to all of you who have listened to this episode, and a warm welcome to new listeners and followers. And a special thanks to Ingrid for taking the time to join this episode. I hope to meet you again in the next episode of Corner of Special Education. Until then, take care.